Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, it is actually 1 o'clock in the morning in my house right now. So it's wonderful to be here, my first time in Vienna. I'm afraid I do not speak German other than to say, schön. I like this city very much. It's very beautiful. I traveled around a little bit yesterday afternoon. So as Dietmar mentioned, I think about thinking. Now, if you think about thinking, this is a painful thing after a while. I've been doing this for 25 years. It's a little bit like being a mouse on a wheel. You go round and round thinking about thinking about thinking about thinking. And it occurred to me yesterday evening that thinking about thinking in this recursive fashion, there's another analogy which sort of helps me to explain what happened, and that is when you actually flush the toilet, it goes round and round and round, but eventually all is klar. It all becomes clear. And what happened is we started to realize in our excursion into trying to understand the human mind that at the end of the day, everything that we do begins with a thought. Everything that we do begins with a thought. If you look around you, everything in here, the clothes you're wearing, the badges you're wearing, the stage I'm standing on, the words that I'm saying, the cameras, the technology, everything begins inside our heads with a thought. So whilst this is a conference about technology and apps and all of these sort of wonderful things like the Internet of Things, the fact of the matter remains that actually it begins inside our heads. So I'm here to start the conference to really tell you a little bit about what goes on inside our heads. Now, when I was young, I was very taken by Rodin's statue of the thinker. Do you know the one I'm talking about? He's like this. Right? So that statue to me was an extraordinary, extraordinary monument back when it was first released in 1904 to the fact that mankind had built this industrial age, an industrial age where almost anything was possible. And I believed when I was young that Rodin was actually celebrating the ingenuity, the sheer intellect of humankind. Now, I believe actually that if Rodin was born 110 years later, if he was actually born today, he would look at the last 110 years and he would look at our planet and he would say, what have we done? We have filled up the oceans with rubbish, we've polluted the air, we've built factories, we've trashed it, and even in space, a place that Rodin could never have conceived that man could affect. We have so much garbage out there that we fear sending rockets up in case it hits someone else's piece of trash. That's 110 years. That's 110 years. It has been my belief, because I've been thinking about thinking for the last 25 of those years, and the last 20 years, we've actually been on the internet measuring thinking. That's since 1994. That's older than some of the people in this audience. And what we've realized was this. The internet had to go through a series of evolutions, dramatic evolutions, to get to a place where understanding human thinking could actually have an impact on how we might save that planet one day. The first internet was the internet of information. This was the information that sort of, before you had to go and buy the newspaper, or you had to get the catalog, or you had to actually go somewhere and listen to someone speak. And all of a sudden, the internet connected the world together with very, very, very small pipelines, which could only transmit tiny amounts of information. How many of you remember a 400 or a 300 baud modem and how long it took to download one page of text? And that suddenly accelerated, didn't it? It suddenly accelerated, and all of a sudden it was 900 baud, and we went, oh my God, this is incredible. And then all of a sudden it was 1200, and the next thing we knew, the word megabyte was born. And after the word megabyte, the megabits and the terabits and the gigaflops, and it just carried on. Of course, the age of information, the information internet, was an information internet that started with text, believe it or not, back in 1965. So it is nearly 40 years. And then became an internet of pictures. And we all know that one picture gives you 1,000 words. It describes a lot. And then it became the internet of video. And it is now extraordinary amounts of video moving around the world. Remember, this is all the product of the human mind. And now, well, tomorrow, you'll be hearing about the Internet of Things. Now, I think the Internet of Things is going to be very interesting, don't get me wrong. But it'll be interesting in an interesting way. And that is that the Internet of Things will connect things such as your refrigerator and the shop on the corner. So when the refrigerator senses there's no more milk or eggs, it will tell the shop, and the shop will deliver the milk and the eggs. So I believe whilst it'll have an enormous impact on our efficiency in the world, it will not have the impact that the information internet had on us personally. At least not until it goes wrong. And then you're going to want to find the person who didn't deliver the eggs and didn't deliver the milk. Now, I'm going to share with you why I believe that we are actually approaching the Internet of people. We've connected ourselves. We can transmit enormous amounts of information. But there's been one thing that has held us up in the world, one thing that has held us up from understanding each other, and that is we do not have a common language to understand the human mind. In every sphere of psychology, there is an entire vocabulary, ideas, models, you name it, which is particular to Jung or Freud or any of the other great masters of psychology. If you think about you right now here, turning to the person sat next to you and trying to describe in a common language what was going on inside your head, I think you might agree with me that you'd have quite a struggle. Not just because you might be embarrassed with what's going on in your mind right this moment, but actually because you don't have a language that the other person will easily understand. So what I'd like to do here is a little thought experiment. So any of you who have either a PDA or something that you can write on, a pencil and paper, grab the program, grab it out now, and I'm going to show you something very interesting. Here up on the screen, you'll see 9 words. Just 9 simple words. Here's the thought experiment. I would like for you to take those 9 words and to write them into 3 lists. The only rule is that each of those lists, each with 3 words in, if you can count, each of those lists must feel as though the words belong together. And you can do this in your heads if you like. So there's 9 words. You're going to distribute them amongst 3 lists, not repeating any words, of course. And all you have to do is to feel as though the words in each of those lists belong together. Just take 2 seconds and do that right now. This is going to be very interesting indeed. Can you all read them okay? Yeah? Good. And if you do this, this will shock you. Still see busy writing. Some of you are doing it in your mind, very powerful. Okay, we're getting there. Fast, thumbs flying furiously. Now, whilst you're doing this, I'm going to tell you I have done this with audiences around the world in different languages. And forgive me for doing it in English here today. It was just the language I was going to speak in, so it was going to be easier for me. But having done this with audiences around the world, I will tell you that about 90 to 95% of everyone has gotten the same answer. 90 to 95%, same answer. So, are we ready? Take a look and tell me, put your hand up, how many people put them more or less in the right ones? Stick your hands up. All right, brilliant. Now answer me this. How did you do that? How did you do that? One rule was, the only rule I gave you is you had to feel as though they belonged together. And somehow, the majority of the people who tried to do it actually ended up putting the same word in the same list. How did you do that? Well, I will tell you that the very mechanism that allowed you to do that is the mechanism of the Internet of People. It's the mechanism of the Internet of People. Are you intrigued yet? You really want to know, don't you? All right, let me show you. Now, we human beings, whilst we are very, very sophisticated and we're very complex and we're extraordinarily brilliant and bright and everything else, we actually don't operate that differently from every other living organism on Earth. There are two very basic driving forces in this world. There are the things that drive us towards things, towards opportunity, towards reward. And by the way, forgive for the hamburger. I looked for some schnitzel, but Google wouldn't download my schnitzel, so we put a hamburger in there instead. So there are those things that part of our thinking that drives us towards opportunity and towards a reward. And there's that part of our thinking that actually drives us away from danger, like snakes, like bad things. Towards, away from. That's the first part of it. The second part of it is, there is a part of us that wants to make things real and concrete. And there's another part of us, which is the human part, that abstracts and makes extraordinary ideas and imagination. Now, you may think this is somewhat elaborate, but let me tell you a little fishy story. How many of you have seen schools of fish moving, swimming together in water, in this perfect synchronized dance? You've all seen this on television, Jacques Cousteau, etc. Well, mankind has actually asked himself the question for centuries, how come they know when to turn? How is it that they all manage to do this at exactly the same moment in time? The fact of the matter is they found out about 2 years ago, and they built a computer model to simulate it, and it proved to be correct. There are 3 simple rules at work. Rule number 1, stick close to something that looks like you. If it's got stripes, and you've got stripes, stick close to it. If it's got 2 legs, and it smiles a lot, stick close to it. Rule number 1, stick close to things that look like you. Rule number 2, move towards the hamburger. Move towards the opportunity. Rule number 3, if it looks like it's going to eat you, go in the opposite direction as fast as you can. Now, it turns out that these 3 very, very basic driving forces are actually the driving forces that are behind all of our behavior. All of our behavior. We have taken the top 30 models of psychology over the last 20 years of research, and we have mapped the traits, the psychological traits from those models, and we have mapped them into this framework of human thinking. The future is about opportunity. It's about reward. It's that place where ideas start. It's that place which actually looks expansive, where anything is possible. The past is that place where we need certainty. This is the place where we stop. We don't go towards things, we hesitate. This is, I don't want it until I know for certain it's going to work. I won't invest in it until I know for sure it's the right thing. And there's that other part of it which we think of as present thinking, which is how we integrate these 2 abstract ways of being in the world, the possibility and that certainty need. And what we get is a map of the world of thinking. And we have now looked for 20 years, and we've seen that almost every single human concept actually belongs somewhere in this map. Now, when you think about this, this is quite extraordinary, because for the first time, we are able to map an individual, and by the way, there's a map on the app, ÜBERALL app, that you can go to, and you can take the profile. It takes about 45 seconds, and you will locate yourself in this map. Every single one of you belongs somewhere in this map. If you know where you belong in this map, you will know an enormous amount about the way that you do your relationships, how you buy things, who you like, who you don't like, who you read, what films you watch, and just about everything else in your life, including why you get divorced and why you marry the next person. Because this is inside motives. These are the driving forces that make us tick. These are the operating systems of the human mind. Now, when you have a map such as this, it actually means that the implications for us are quite huge. Innovation works by virtue of understanding how to bring different kinds of thinking together into a team or an organization, and to organize that thinking not randomly, but to organize that thinking in such a way that it actually moves information around people. If you started out with that kind of thinking that says, no, I don't think I want to try until I'm sure, you would never try anything new. So clearly, innovation cannot start with past thinking. If, on the other hand, you didn't have past thinking and all you ever did was keep trying things new, you get the average startup. Every week it's starting something new. And I can see lots of smiles because you know exactly what I'm talking about if you're in a startup. If you only had present thinking, you would want to create a kind of stability. You wouldn't want the upset of the new and the change. And you wouldn't want to have to wait for certainty. All you would want to do is to create that stasis, that balance, so everything can keep moving in exactly the same way. Now, by the way, I grew up in Switzerland. And if you want to know the perfect place to study present thinking, it's Switzerland. It's defined by cogs and rails. And everything has a process, and every form has to be filled out completely exactly the right way. I kid you not. How many of you are from Switzerland? Do you agree that it tends to be that exact, yeah. And what's very interesting is I have a lot of friends in San Francisco from Switzerland. Because it's not that Switzerland doesn't have future thinkers. It's just that they don't stay in Switzerland, they go to San Francisco. And the same, by the way, is true in France. France is a very past-thinking country. And a lot of the entrepreneurs leave France and they actually go to Silicon Valley. And the reason that they do that is because they have the freedom to express their ideas. They have the freedom to explore new and different things. If you notice what I'm saying, I have just moved my conversation from the individual level and how we as individuals actually relate to the world around us, and I'm now talking about cultures. The expression of cultures. America, we have measured, is a future-thinking culture. That's why it's always changing, always doing something new, and always repeating the same mistakes. England is very present thinking. It doesn't want to get rid of its monarchy, it just wants to get upset about the monarchy the whole time. It does the same thing year after year after year. Germany, we did some market research in Germany, very past thinking. So the innovation in Germany tends to be about making that which is already made better, more precise, more refined, more exact. It's not about changing the whole thing. It's not about throwing it all out and starting from scratch. So this model of thinking of humans within time, and by the way, this is talking about human temporality. And human temporality, the word comes from the Latin tempus, time. So our ability to think in time is actually our most root, basic way of perceiving the world around us. So we have found applications for this on the internet, not only in the obvious areas such as market research and looking at social networks, and I'll show you a couple in a second, but we're also using this in education today. So you've all heard of MOOCs, these massively distributed online courses. This is the supposed future of education. They give the class away online, and they charge you $100,000 for the certificate to say that you did the online class. It's a very clever model. I wish I was in on it. We have now worked with educational institutions where we are seeing that certain kinds of thinking actually are better at learning certain kinds of things. And certain professors are better at teaching certain kinds of ways. And certain courses can be designed for different kinds of thought patterns. Do you get the implications of this? Because when I went to school, there was no alternative. Everyone had the same class, the same course, the same instructor. And by the way, I was one of those people who failed. I was a dismal failure in academia, and it does me an enormous amount of good to go back to my old school. And every time I publish a new paper, I take them my paper or my new book and I say, look, this is what stupidity produces. I enjoy it. I just stick it in there and turn the knife a little bit every time. And my father, unfortunately, paid all of the school fees, but he wasn't here to see the result. So education is an area where we're very, very interested and we're doing a lot of research. We're also doing a lot of research in big data. So here's this massive amount of data moving around the world. Some friends of mine have just published a book called Code Halos. If you've not read it or seen it, you absolutely have to see this book. Code Halos is about the fact that we as human beings are now walking around with a halo, literally a halo of code all about us. There's one ingredient missing in the code halo, which is why we are now working with these people to see how to introduce mindtime as a framework for understanding the human psychology on the internet. And the piece that's missing is the human element. They know what you buy, they know when you buy it, they know how long it takes you to get to work and whether you're going home. They know what you ate and when you ate it. They know who you married, where you got married. They know everything about you. They just don't know you. They just don't know you. And that, to me, is really funny. So the Internet of People is an internet where all of a sudden this cold halo makes sense. We've been doing some research work with Zurich University in Switzerland where we are actually looking at big data. And if you can imagine the super collider at CERN, and you have this massive amount of information flowing in one direction, and you know what they do at the super collider? They have one massive beam going this way very, very fast, and they have another one going around the other way, and where they hit, it creates some information. So that's a good analogy for what we're doing. We're taking all of this big data and we're flowing it down the pipe and we're hitting it with this framework called mindetime. And we're fracturing that data into archetypes so we can actually understand the behavioral patterns of human beings in the data. Now, this is world-changing stuff because what we're really interested in is changing things like energy consumption globally. We're interested in changing education globally. We're interested in changing things like obesity and our behaviors as societies. And we cannot do this if we do not have a common language, a common way of understanding people. So that's why this science is so promising. It's very, very exciting because for the first time, we believe that we have a cross-cultural, cross-language, global, universal system that can actually allow us to understand human beings in the internet. So this is a picture of a group on Facebook. We built a Facebook app a few years ago just for fun. Actually, it was my birthday present from my chief technology officer. I promise you, it was my birthday. He calls me up and says, "I've got a birthday present for you." I went, "What's that?" "I built you a Facebook application." So I went online and I was the first person to use it. So this is a group called Next Edge. And as you can imagine, a group called Next Edge is exploring the next edge. And as you can imagine, a group that's exploring the next edge is not exploring the past. These are almost entirely future thinkers, it turned out, in the next edge. Not surprisingly, of course. This group here, on the other hand, is a group of people who listen to a news talk radio station in America. Not surprising that it's all past thinkers, because they're the ones who want to have the information. They're the ones who want to have the authority before making their decisions. And this group here are my friends on Facebook. You can see they're everywhere. And by the way, the little blue dot down there in the far right-hand corner, that's me. That's me. That's the guy who failed at school. That's the guy who couldn't do math. That's the guy who couldn't do Latin. That's the guy who couldn't write properly or read properly, make spelling mistakes, which, by the way, I still make. But it's also the person who innovated a different way of thinking about human beings. In part because of the pain of not fitting, but in greater part because I actually saw an opportunity to innovate the way we think about human beings on the internet back in 1994. For those of you who haven't taken the profile and like QR codes, I don't know if it'll work from where you are, but if you hold up your QR reader to that, it'll take you to the application, and we're mapping this particular group. So I'm just going to leave that up for a second. So, the Internet of People. The Internet of People is not about commerce alone, although it includes that. The Internet of People is not just about education. The Internet of People is not about any one thing. The Internet of People, for me, is the dream that I have that collectively we can do what Einstein bid us to do. He said we cannot solve our problems with the same level of thinking that we created them with. We must see the world anew. I believe, I truly do believe, that we as human beings, wired as we are, intelligent as we are, smart as we are, and surely motivated to survive on our planet, we are now finally at the edge of being able to create a new era for ourselves, and not just to innovate in our small clusters of people in businesses and organizations, but for the first time, humankind can actually collaborate globally and innovate a new future for ourselves. Thank you very much indeed.